This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring a discussion on RBI's focus on KYC compliance to check data breach and money laundering. The participants are Shankar Iyer, economic analyst, and Arjun Chaudhary, anchor.
So I'm joined by Sri Shankar Iyer to discuss about the Reserve Bank of India's focus on KYC compliance to check data breach and money laundering. Mr. Iyer, for the benefit of our listeners, could you give us some background, the circumstances as to why the RBI is focusing on KYC compliance to check data breach and money laundering now?
The very concept of KYC comes from learnings from various terrorism activities across the world. You would know that India has had attacks by terrorists where funding was used through illegal means. After the 9/11 attacks in New York on the World Trade Center and elsewhere, the world sort of came together and two groups were formed. One for standards on anti-money laundering and one for combating of financing of terrorism. These groups, India is a signatory and a part of the groups that came to put together the what is called the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force. This was issued in January of 2004. So basically, these are conventions and protocols that were set in 2004, and the Know Your Customer guidelines of RBI were first issued in February 2005. What is the basic requirement in this? That a financial entity, whether it is a bank or a non-bank finance company, and more recently, payments bank and wallet companies, should know who their customer is. And how do they know? The customer suo moto declares his identity, provides a proof of identity, and provides a proof of address so that he or she is known. It is basically you transact with someone, you know who they are and what their background is. That also enables to track transactions. Now, this simple rule has been in place for over 15 years. India has subsequently signed two other things. And as of today, even though there are these conventions and protocols, terrorist funding is estimated to be somewhere in the region of $2 trillion all over the world. This happens in various ways. For the benefit of our listeners, it is enough to say that having a KYC norm protects the country, protects their own interests because somebody else shouldn't be using their identity, and protects the stability of the financial sector. And this has been repeated by the RBI every year. If you see the recent actions, I mean, this is not the first time that RBI has pulled up banks for this. There have been previous incidents also.
Mr. Iyer, apart from offences against the state in the form of financing terrorism by banks and using banking channels, are there any other reasons why the central bank would pull up payments banks or commercial banks or banking channels for this reason, specifically money laundering and data breach now?
So the entire financial system functions on the basis of the identity of transactor and the transacting entity. Based on this, there are several guardrails that have been instituted, whether you are trading in shares, whether you're trading in mutual funds, whether you're making payments, whether you're opening accounts, whether you're doing fixed deposits, whether you're buying bonds. The regulations of all these transactions in the financial system, the stability of those transactions is based on identity, the identity of the customer, which is basically the KYC. Now, if this KYC was not there, or if this KYC is being violated, a person could violate any restriction that is put on any kind of transaction because simply they don't know who the person is. In a similar way, if the identity is not known, that person can launder money for another entity and pass it through the system and take it out in some other form. Gains from illegal activity could be brought into the normal or regular financial channels, and that will actually destabilize, has the threat of destabilizing the entire financial sector. The sanctity of banks, bank depositors, the money with the banks or with institutions depends wholly on the sanctity of identity being maintained, which is why this has happened. I am surprised that despite this being a norm for over 15 years, despite the Reserve Bank of India issuing master circulars at least twice a year, they have been warning these banks. There have been actions on several banks on minor or major violations of the KYC law. There has been action on Citibank, there have been action on non-bank finance companies. All of these have led to these institutions being fined and being asked to correct their behavior on KYC norms. I presume in the early stages, some of these issues were more about the institution not complying with normal norms, which is in itself very surprising because in India since 2010, we have an instrument which the world is envious of, which is called Aadhaar. And Aadhaar, when it was set up, one of the basic objectives of Aadhaar was to provide identity to people so that they could open accounts. Those identities would then be corralled by the Know Your Customer regulations, which is how we opened 510 million Jandan accounts based on the idea of Aadhaar's identity and based on this knowledge that we know who's opening this account, who those people are. Now, action has been taken in 2020, 2019, 2018, 2022, and the RBI has consistently followed this up. The question now is why is this suddenly popped up? And I think this has something to do with the nature of the new innovations that have been put together by fintech companies and the nature of funding that has enabled these fintech companies to do this. So when you are funded by a venture capital firm or a private equity or whichever form of funding that you brought in to set up the payments bank or a wallet within, the driving force there is to accumulate account holders, accumulate consumers, accumulate numbers, because it is the numbers that drive the next round of funding. And one can say that this has led to these companies not following the norms. But if you look at the data that has been put out by RBI and the data that has been published by some publications, a huge number of these accounts are opened on one PAN card. Now, if multiple accounts are being opened on one PAN card, it is a real hazard to the system. I am amazed that this has been going on and the action has not been more strict. There are several laws now on misuse of identity. There is several laws on data breach. If my PAN card number is being issued to somebody else's, that is also a violation of the data law. The third is the sanctity of the institution. How do you trust these institutions if they are not following the very basic principle that needs to be followed? As I said, the funding issue and the footprint issue, and people want to gather size so that they get the next round of funding. There is also plain neglect. And the third part is criminal behavior. Now, if I'm told that out of 175,000 accounts in some of these payment banks, over 50,000 are under a cloud, some kind of suspicion or the other. What message is this going to send to the international system? What kind of message are we giving to our own people who have been following these norms? I think the Reserve Bank of India should come out and name and shame these institutions. One thing that is lacking in this, while the Reserve Bank of India has been acting and the Financial Intelligence Unit has been tracking these transactions, I think people must be told that what exactly is the violation of the payment bank. And they should be listed. That data should come out.
Mr. Iyer, apart from state regulation, which demands disclosure and accuracy in reporting from its customers and other partners in the banking business, how does this benefit the customer? How does it benefit the average person through this means of state regulation of ensuring disclosures of this nature?
As I said, the entire edifice of banking is secured by the knowledge that my account belongs to me only, and the bank is similarly following the rules for everybody else. The moment you have accounts which don't have an underlying identity compliance, that means those accounts will be violating A, the banking rules, B, they could be profiting from other. So the entire financial sector, whether you buy a bond or an equity share or mutual fund or open an account, a fixed deposit, all of these are corralled by guardrails, the basis of which is one person, one identity, one account. The moment you take that away, then you open the sector to complete chaos and instability. how do we ensure security is by getting those guardrails into place so that the banks know who is transacting on behalf of whom or with whom, and there is a trail. The moment you don't have a trail of the money, hypothetically, a person who has accumulated money through illegal means can bring it into the banking channel if he is allowed to open an account without a KYC and launder that money, create a new instrument or a new asset class, and take the money out of the banking system, whereby the money is laundered. So, this is not something that should be allowed.
Mr. Iyer, how does the Prevention of Money Laundering Act and the IT Act address these problems in terms of prevention and enforcement action?
So theoretically, all transactions, whether they lead to a gain or a loss, are recorded and they are under one identity. Say Mr. John Jani Dhanardhan has an account. He transacts in the share market, he buys a mutual fund, he buys gold, or whatever he does. His profit or loss or gains and losses are recorded in his bank account. There is a credit trail in his account. And that credit trail is submitted to the income tax, and the income tax can assess whether he has to pay tax or not have to pay tax. Now, assume that there is this person, an account JJJ, but nobody knows who that person is. And there are all these gains and losses in that account which are not being submitted to an IT scrutiny. Then that means the country is being cheated of tax. The second part of it is that if this kind of activity happens and money is being laundered, it falls squarely under probably FEMA or PMLA, and one would know what is the nature of these violations only when the data comes out. As of now, we know that 50,000 or so accounts have been found to be under suspicious transactions. What is the volume of those transactions? What kind of those transactions? And who are the counterparties to those transactions? All of this should be put out. I think in the beginning, the first step the Reserve Bank of India needs to do is to there might be some innocent people who have not done KYC for whatever reasons. So they should be given an online system to correct their situation. Thereafter, the others, companies, the private funders, the private equity funds, all of them should be named. And this report, I hope it comes as early as possible so that there is clarity. And while all this is happening, the Reserve Bank of India may want to sort of put out a list of entities that it has cleared where they have no suspicion, and that group of institutions and entities is what people would migrate to from whatever the suspicious entities is.
Mr. Iyer, finally, you spoke about action to be taken under the PMLA or the IT Act. You have RBI also, which has a power to cancel the licenses of banking institutions. Do you think that that is something that's possible if there is sufficient evidence to show that they are in non-compliance of KYC norms imposed by the RBI in its master circular?
I don't want to be a fearmonger or a scaremonger. I am saying the data is with the RBI. The RBI should sift through this data, find out which is neglectful behavior, what is criminal behavior. When it is criminal behavior, the data should be handed over to IT, PMLA, FEMA, whoever is the responsible authority, and that should be put out. As far as the entities are themselves concerned, not only the entities, but even those institutions which have funded these entities should be named. The next level would be failing a logical, reasonable explanation from these entities. I think the license would be suspended.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Shankar Iyer, for giving us such a detailed explanation on RBI's focus on KYC compliance to check data breach and money laundering, and how the two violations are actually interrelated for the benefit of our listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on RBI's focus on KYC compliance to check data breach and money laundering. The participants were Shankar Iyer, economic analyst, and Arjun Chaudhary, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on a mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 9289094044.